On October 6, 1979, the city of Columbus, Ohio, became the epicenter of the bodybuilding world. The historic Veterans Memorial Auditorium was chosen to host the most anticipated event of the year, the 15th Mr. Olympia. The atmosphere was electric, more than just a contest. It felt like a milestone in turning bodybuilding into a global spectacle. The streets around the arena were packed with fans, reporters, and curious onlookers who wanted a glimpse of the biggest physiques on the planet. That stage wasn't chosen by chance. Veterans Memorial already held a special place in bodybuilding history. It was there that Arnold Schwarzenegger scored his first major win on American soil back in 1970. Now, almost a decade later, the same venue was about to set the scene for another legendary moment. It was as if the sport had a personal connection with those walls, turning the auditorium into a true cathedral of iron. The event was organized by Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jim Lorimer, teaming up with the Weider brothers and the IFBB. This powerhouse collaboration showed just how much the sport had grown and professionalized. Arnold, fresh out of his competitive prime, was stepping into a new role, not just the ambassador of bodybuilding, but also a businessman and promoter. His presence behind the curtain gave the event even more shine and ensured the media spotlight. Another detail that made the 1979 Olympia so special was the fact that it was held alongside the Mr. Universe and Mr. International. Three massive competitions rolled into one, making Columbus the bodybuilding capital of the world for a few days. For the fans who bought tickets, it was a true muscle festival. Talent, sweat, and dedication on display from athletes across the globe. This era also marked a turning point for the sport. Bodybuilding had gained international exposure thanks to Arnold and the documentary Pumping Iron, which pushed competitions beyond gyms and niche magazines. By 1979, with expanded TV coverage and media buzz, Mr. Olympia wasn't just for die-hard lifters anymore. It was becoming mainstream entertainment. And the Veterans Memorial had all the ingredients to seal that legacy. A classic, imposing venue with top-notch structure, it soon became a landmark for bodybuilding. No wonder people would later call it the Madison Square Garden of the sport, eventually hosting the Arnold Classic too. It was the kind of stage where every competition instantly felt historic. Now imagine being in that audience in 1979, the lights rising, the crowd roaring, and the world's greatest bodybuilders ready to step out. You just knew you were about to witness something unforgettable. It wasn't only about who would take home the trophy. It was about being part of a cultural shift where bodybuilding was planting itself firmly as a worldwide spectacle. And it was all happening right there in Columbus on that unforgettable Saturday night. One of the most talked about aspects of the 1979 Olympia was the prize money. The total purse hit $50,000, huge for that time, and it proved that bodybuilding had officially leveled up. This wasn't just a muscle show anymore. It was a serious, professional sport, drawing athletes, sponsors, and media attention in a whole new way. Half of that amount, $25,000, went to the night's big winner, Frank Zane, who claimed his third straight Olympia title. That check wasn't just payment for a victory. It symbolized how his refined aesthetics and dedication were being valued at a level once reserved for more mainstream sports. It was the ultimate payoff for years of discipline and for sticking to a style built on balance and proportion. Runner-up Mike Mentzer walked away with about $10,000, still a major payday at the time. Even without the crown, the young star had already proven himself as a force, someone capable of going head-to-head with the reigning champ. The prize underscored the respect he had earned and built the expectation that he might soon become the new face of Olympia. But the prize money meant more than just numbers. For athletes, it was proof that bodybuilding could be more than a passion project. It could be a real career. Each check handed out on that stage was also a message to young lifters everywhere. This sport has a future. And for sponsors, it was a clear invitation to invest in something that was exploding in popularity. It's worth remembering that in earlier years, the payouts were way smaller. Many champions had to juggle day jobs just to afford their training and strict diets. But by 1979, with more substantial prize money, the path toward true professional bodybuilding was finally being paved, where full-time dedication could actually pay off in a fair and meaningful way. Another detail that didn't go unnoticed was the crowd's reaction. When the prize money was announced, The audience erupted almost as if they had won something too. Seeing their idols get real financial recognition was proof that the sport was finally being taken seriously. That moment strengthened the bond between fans, athletes, and organizers, turning Olympia into an even more anticipated spectacle every year. The 1979 prize wasn't just about money. It symbolized bodybuilding's evolution, shifting from being just a muscle showcase to a true professional sport, with athletes who were respected and fans who were more engaged than ever. It was a turning point that helped shape the modern era of competition. Back in '79, Mr. Olympia still had the traditional weight class split. On one side were the lightweights, guys up to 200 pounds, about 90 kilos. On the other side were the heavyweights, those above 200 pounds. The split was meant to balance the contest between different body types, but it was already raising eyebrows. How much should sheer size really matter compared to aesthetics? That very question would become central as the championship unfolded. Interestingly, 1979 turned out to be the last year with weight classes. Starting in 1980, the organization scrapped that system, cementing the idea that Olympia should crown just one absolute physique, no matter the number on the scale. It was another sign of how '79 marked a true turning point, closing one chapter and opening the door to more direct and high-stakes battles. Judging itself was split into two phases. First came the prejudging, a highly technical process. It had 3 rounds: comparisons in relaxed poses, mandatory poses, like the iconic front double biceps or the lat spread, and finally, each competitor's free posing routine. This was the real trial by fire, where judges measured symmetry, proportion, definition, and stage presence. The finals brought a different kind of energy. Instead of just having the category winners square off, the 6 highest-scoring athletes, regardless of weight, were brought back on stage for the much-anticipated group pose down. This raised the drama, putting aesthetic physiques and mass monsters side by side, sparking direct comparisons that fans usually debated only in the lobby or gym locker rooms. But the most controversial change was the new scoring method for the finals. Only first-place votes counted, meaning it didn't matter if an athlete racked up a bunch of second-place nods. What mattered was who got the most outright number 1 picks. This stirred up plenty of debate, since it gave more weight to individual judge preferences and less to overall consistency across rounds. For many, that rule was a game-changer in how 1979 played out. On one hand, it made things simple. The champ was literally the majority favorite. But on the other, it left plenty of room for heated arguments about fairness and judging criteria. It was a system that rewarded impression over accumulation, a snapshot rather than the whole journey. All these tweaks made the 1979 Olympia a one-of-a-kind contest. It didn't just crown winners. It sparked discussions about how bodybuilding itself should be judged moving forward. The crowd walked out not only blown away by the physiques they'd seen, but also buzzing about the rules, feeling how a single first-place vote could shift the destiny of the entire show. That year's Olympia also featured one of the strongest athlete lineups of its time. In the up to 200-pound category, the lightweights, the big favorite was Frank Zane. Already a 2-time Olympia champ, the master of aesthetics came in to defend his crown with flawless proportions and razor-sharp conditioning. He embodied the so-called era of the lightweights, proving that balance and beauty could triumph over pure mass. Right behind him was Boyer Coe, one of the most consistent competitors on the circuit. He had finished runner-up the 2 previous years and showed up sharper than ever, especially with his abs and quads. Though he kept bumping into Zane at the top, his constant evolution made him a dangerous threat, a rival that nobody could afford to overlook. Another standout among the lightweights was Robbie Robinson, the legendary Black Prince. After winning the heavyweight class in both 1977 and 1978, he shocked the scene by dropping down into the under 200 category. Expectations were sky-high. Robinson had charisma, striking lines, and a physique that had already won over crowds. But his prep wasn't ideal that year, and many fans felt he lacked the dry, razor-like conditioning that had made him unstoppable in the past. In the same lightweight division, one debut really stood out: Chris Dickerson. He already had several pro wins under his belt, and at 40 years old he showed he still had plenty to offer, with razor-sharp detail and those legendary calves. Sharing the spotlight was the charismatic Danny Padilla, the giant killer. Short in height but massive in impact, Padilla always wowed audiences with the contrast between his stature and his dense muscularity, even if in 1979 he didn't quite bring his best form. We can't forget the names that rounded out the lightweight lineup either. Albert Beckles, the eternal veteran and a living example of longevity in the sport. Tom Platz, still at the start of his journey but already turning heads with his freakish legs. Ed Corney, widely regarded as one of the greatest posers of all time, along with Carlos Rodriguez and Steve Davis, who added even more depth to what became one of the most competitive divisions in Olympia history. On the heavyweight side, over 200 pounds, the man stealing all the attention was Mike Mentzer. Weighing in at 220 pounds, about 100 kilos, he brought a dense, thick physique and a revolutionary training philosophy known as heavy duty. For many, he represented the future of bodybuilding, ushering in an era where sheer muscle mass would start to dominate. Also in that class, veteran Dennis Tenorino surprised fans by showing he still had gas in the tank. Australia's Roger Walker made his mark with a solid build, while Roy Callender, who was actually considered the favorite, was held back by injury and showed up softer than expected, lacking the trademark hardness that usually defined his physique. To round it off, there was the comeback of Bob Birdsong, who hadn't competed since 1975, though his return didn't quite match the top contenders. With that roster, the 1979 Olympia was set to explode. Veterans, aesthetic icons, charismatic stars, and new mass monsters were all sharing the same stage, each one representing not just a body, but an entire philosophy of bodybuilding. Everything pointed to an unforgettable showdown, where every athlete stood for a different vision of what the sport could become. If there's one defining mark of the 1979 Olympia, it was the rivalry between Frank Zane and Mike Mentzer. On one side, the 37-year-old veteran, a three-time champ trying to solidify his reign. On the other, the 27-year-old newcomer, a revolutionary force. It wasn't just muscle against muscle. It was a clash of ideas, a true battle of philosophies that split fans, judges, and experts right down the middle. Frank Zane was already known as the master of proportion. His physique looked like a classical sculpture, with every muscle perfectly balanced in harmony. For him, the secret was equilibrium. Nothing excessive, everything in flawless symmetry. His training style emphasized moderate volume, attention to detail, and an impeccable stage presentation, studied poses, and a flow that felt almost artistic. Mike Mentzer, on the other hand, embodied the rebellion of a new generation. With his heavy-duty method, he promoted short but brutally intense workouts, pushing every set to absolute failure. His philosophy leaned heavily on scientific principles inspired by Arthur Jones, breaking away from the marathon gym sessions that dominated at the time. The result was obvious: a heavy, dense, and powerful physique that radiated raw strength. That contrast made their face-off much bigger than just choosing a champion. In a sense, the audience was watching a live debate about the future of bodybuilding. Would Olympia continue to reward Zane's refined, balanced aesthetics, or shift toward Mentzer's overwhelming mass and brute force? Fans were split, with the stands divided between art and science, beauty and power. The difference between them was just as visible on stage. Zane moved calmly, breathing into each pose like an artist revealing a masterpiece. Mentzer, by contrast, radiated intensity, commanding the stage with raw energy and dominance. It was like watching two different worlds collide in the same historic moment, each with its own merits, each with its own legion of loyal supporters. That rivalry became even more intense because there was no room for a tie. With the scoring system based only on first-place votes, judges had to pick one side. And that choice was bigger than a trophy. It was a statement about which philosophy would define the sport's future. In the end, the Zane versus Mentzer duel turned the 1979 Olympia into an unforgettable edition. It wasn't just about who took the crown. It was about which vision of bodybuilding would prevail. But even before a single pose hit the stage, the Olympia of '79 had already shown its unique character backstage. The weigh-in, usually a quiet and private moment, was held in front of a crowd full of fans, reporters, and judges. That put a lot of competitors on edge, most didn't want to strip down without being pumped. The one who broke the ice was Frank Zane, cool and calculated. He stepped in, weighed himself, and walked out almost unnoticed. A simple move, but one that already showed the confidence and composure of a champion. Zane came into Columbus with an almost scientific prep. His diet, carefully measured down to the gram, included liver, eggs, and yams in the days leading up to the show. Every bite had a purpose, to keep his body full, dry, and stable at the same time. Nothing was left to chance, and even his carb intake was fine-tuned so his muscles would pop the right way once he hit the stage. Another key strategy was how he managed the pump. While most competitors were backstage hours before, burning energy, trying to blow their muscles up with quick sets, Zane did the opposite. He walked in cold, conserving energy, trusting that his physique would expand naturally as he posed under the bright lights. It was a bold move, one that required total self-confidence and mastery over his own physiology. And you can't overlook the mental factor. Frank Zane believed just as much in the power of the mind as in the power of muscle. He dedicated time to meditation, even using blindfolds to sharpen his focus and visualize his routine. That psychological prep kept him calm under pressure, while others backstage were scrambling for the perfect last-minute pose. For Zane, the secret was simple: spend your energy only when it really matters. Mike Mentzer, meanwhile, took a very different approach. He arrived at Olympia brimming with confidence, convinced he had the physique to dethrone Zane. During Prejudging, he stunned the crowd with his density and sheer mass. His physique was visually overwhelming, instantly winning the support of those who believed the aesthetic era was already over. The reaction was immediate. Jim Manion, who would later become president of the IFBB Pro League, bluntly said, "If Mentzer doesn't win, it's a crime." And the legendary Serge Nubret was even sharper. "Mike is better, but Zane is the champion." Those words summed up the dilemma perfectly. Mentzer had the muscle, but Zane had history, consistency, and the edge of being the reigning king. So even before the pose down, the 1979 Olympia was already loaded with tension. On one side, Zane's cold, calculated aesthetics. On the other, Mentzer's explosive mass and intensity. The stage lights hadn't even hit their bodies yet, but the clash of strategies already made it clear this duel would go down as more than just a competition. When the lights finally rose for Prejudging, the Veterans Memorial buzzed with anticipation. Frank Zane appeared at his absolute best, ripped like never before, but carrying more size than in previous years. Every pose revealed deep cuts, detailed muscles, and harmony worthy of his title as the master of aesthetics. It was the perfect blend of size and proportion, and the audience quickly realized he was primed for one of his greatest performances. On the other side, Mike Mentzer lit up the heavyweight class. His physique was described as almost shockingly good. Thick, massive, and imposing from every angle. He looked every bit like the future of bodybuilding. His presence overshadowed contenders like Roger Walker and Roy Callender, who just couldn't match his consistency. Not everyone, though, came in at their best. Robbie Robinson, despite his charisma, stepped on stage far from his peak, missing the conditioning that had once made him a fan favorite. Danny Padilla, the beloved giant killer, also fell short, smiling humbly as if to admit he wasn't at his sharpest. Boyer Coe, on the other hand, impressed with razor-sharp definition, but still lacked the torso thickness to threaten the very top. The show also gave fans some special moments outside the main battle. Lisa Lyon, a true pioneer of women's bodybuilding, delivered a memorable routine that proved women had their place in the sport. And right after, the crowd was treated to the emotional return of Franco Columbu, posing for the first time since his devastating 1977 injury at the World's Strongest Man. His comeback drew heartfelt applause, a reminder that determination can overcome even the toughest setbacks. Finally, the tension peaked. The top six, Zane, Mentzer, Coe, Dickerson, Robinson, and Tenorino, were called out for the collective pose down. This was it, the moment of truth. All of them, side by side, fighting for every single vote from the judges. The audience roared with each transition, almost as if they could feel the tug-of-war between two different philosophies playing out right there on stage. And that's when the tables turned. Mentzer, who had dominated Prejudging, came back on stage looking a bit smoother, without the sharp hardness that had wowed everyone earlier. That detail proved costly. Even with bigger muscles, he lost some of the crisp definition that might have sealed the deal. Zane, calm and consistent, held his aesthetic form from start to finish. Every pose reinforced the idea that he was the most complete physique of the night. When the announcement echoed through the auditorium, the moment of glory arrived. Frank Zane was crowned three-time Mr. Olympia. The crowd erupted in applause, even as controversy brewed backstage. On one side stood flawless aesthetics. On the other, the mass that seemed to signal the future. The 1979 Olympia had chosen its champion. The verdict made it official. Frank Zane was the overall winner, claiming his third straight Olympia title after victories in '77 and '78. With that, he cemented himself as the face of the aesthetic era, a reference point for proportion, balance, and flawless stage presentation. In the under 200-pound class, Zane's dominance was unquestionable. He took first with authority, followed by Boyer Coe in second, once again consistent and steadily improving. Third went to Robbie Robinson, still charismatic but lacking the conditioning to climb higher. Chris Dickerson, the promising newcomer, landed in fourth, leaving a clear mark that greater victories lay ahead. In fifth place was Danny Padilla, the famous giant killer, who, even off his best, still earned respect among the greats. The lineup continued with Carlos Rodriguez and the ageless Albert Beckles, plus Tom Platz, already grabbing attention with the monstrous legs that would later make him a legend. Ed Corney, the posing master, finished ninth, and Steve Davis closed the top 10. On the over 200 side, the spotlight belonged to Mike Mentzer. He won his class with a rock-solid performance, proving he had the firepower to challenge for the overall. Dennis Tenorino surprised in second, showing he could still bring it at a high level, while Australia's Roger Walker, steady and consistent, rounded out the top three. In fourth, Roy Callender disappointed compared to expectations. Seen as a favorite, his injury left him off his usual form, far from his best. Bob Birdsong, back after years away, finished fifth, but wasn't able to trouble the frontrunners. What truly keeps the 1979 Olympia alive in memory, though, are the controversies surrounding the result. Even though Zane was crowned champion, many believed Mike Mentzer had brought a physique capable of toppling him. For those critics, the 27-year-old represented the sport's natural evolution, bigger, denser, and just as impactful. The debate wasn't just about who should have won. It was about where bodybuilding itself was headed. On one hand, Zane's refined aesthetics symbolized the art of the human form, the perfect sculpture. On the other, Mentzer's mass and intensity pointed to bodybuilding's growth into a spectacle of ever larger physiques. It was a historic crossroads for the sport. Despite the loss, Mike Mentzer didn't walk away diminished. If anything, he left Columbus bigger than ever, cemented as bodybuilding's philosophical rebel. His heavy-duty method, his radical training ideas, and even his criticisms of the competitive system turned him into an influential voice. Without a Sando trophy, Mentzer still became a symbol of resistance to the status quo. Frank Zane, meanwhile, lifting the Sando for the third time, reached his ultimate moment of triumph. He had hit the peak of his career, uniting definition, proportion, and consistency in a flawless presentation. In interviews afterward, he even admitted he could retire at that very peak, knowing nothing might ever top that victory. Among fans, the divide was obvious. Many celebrated Zane's third title, mesmerized by his aesthetics. Others walked out of Veterans Memorial grumbling that Mentzer had been robbed. That split fueled debates in magazines, gyms, and locker rooms for years, keeping the flame of the '79 Olympia alive. The 1979 Olympia wasn't just another edition of bodybuilding's biggest stage, it became a true landmark. It represented both the peak and the beginning of the end of the so-called era of the lightweights, which spanned from 1976 to 1983. A unique window between Arnold Schwarzenegger's mass dominance and Lee Haney's rise, it was a time when refined aesthetics could still beat raw size. For Frank Zane, that title carried a special weight. It was the last of his career, sealing his legacy as the ultimate master of aesthetics. He proved that a balanced, symmetrical, artistically presented physique could still reach the top in a sport leaning harder and harder toward mass. His three-peat consolidated a school of thought that still inspires athletes chasing not just size, but harmony. At the same time, the event elevated Mike Mentzer to a whole new level. Even in defeat, he left Columbus recognized as a visionary, the man who championed brutally intense, short-duration training with heavy duty. Though he would never claim a Mr. Olympia title, his philosophy reshaped how athletes and coaches thought about training, leaving a lasting mark on generations. The impact of the 1979 Olympia carried on in the years that followed. Zane's victory was, in many ways, the last great stand of aesthetics against the rise of mass. Starting in 1984, with the Lee Haney era and later Dorian Yates, the scales tipped decisively toward physiques that were denser, heavier, and more massive, ushering in what became known as the mass era. That contrast turned the event into a true watershed moment. The 1979 Olympia showed, perhaps more than any other, the clash between two visions of bodybuilding. On one side, the classical art of the human form, sculpted with proportion and elegance. On the other, raw power, the spectacle of hypertrophy taken to the extreme. The memory of that showdown lives on not just in the photos and videos of the time, but in the debates it sparked. Even today, fans still argue about whether Zane was the rightful winner or if Mentzer should have been crowned as the symbol of a new age. Far from diminishing the event, that controversy only made it greater, keeping it as one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of the sport. In the end, the 1979 Olympia reminds us that bodybuilding was never just about muscle. It was about philosophies, visions, and values. It was the night when aesthetics won for the last time, but when mass announced its inevitable future. A unique event that forever changed how we see the human body and the very essence of competition. And that wraps up our journey through the legendary 1979 Mr. Olympia, an event that left an indelible mark on bodybuilding history. It was more than just a contest. It was a clash of philosophies, a turning point between classical aesthetics and raw mass. But now I want to hear from you. Whose side would you have been on that night in Columbus? Did Zane deserve his third straight title, or was Mentzer robbed? If you enjoyed this trip back in time, you know what to do. Hit that like button, because it really helps spread this content to more fans of the sport. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss any of the epic stories we've still got lined up. If you want to support our work even further, consider becoming a channel member. It's your chance to be part of a true community of bodybuilding history fans. And of course, leave your comment below. We want to hear your thoughts. What was the most memorable moment of this Olympia for you? Who impressed you the most from that legendary lineup? The floor is yours to share ideas and connect with other fans. And one more thing, before you go, make sure to check out the video popping up on your screen right now. If you enjoyed reliving the story of 1979, I'm sure you'll love diving into another classic edition of Mr. Olympia we've already covered here. That's it for today. Like, comment, join as a member, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video as we continue uncovering the greatest moments in bodybuilding history together. Until then, never forget, the legend of the sport lives on every time you hit play.